When organizations go through transformations, they typically are also transforming their culture. But what exactly is cultural change and how do we enable it? That's what I want to talk about here today. My name is Eric Kimberling. I'm the CEO of Third Stage Consulting. We're an independent consulting firm that helps clients through their digital transformation journeys. And as I mentioned, cultural change is often a key component of any sort of transformation, whether you're talking about a business transformation or a digital transformation. In addition to process changes and potentially technology changes, oftentimes organizations are using technology and business processes to fuel and to bend the culture in a way that meets whatever the future strategic objectives are of the organization. So what I want to talk about today is, first of all, what is cultural change and what are the different components of it? And second of all, how do we enable that cultural change? The first step in any sort of cultural transformation is to define what is that mindset that you want the organization to represent in the future. And what I mean by that is oftentimes you have organizations that are smaller at some point, and in the future they become larger. And during that journey of growth and becoming a larger, more mature organization, it puts new needs on the organizational culture, and the culture itself needs to transition and shift and bend to keep up with the changes of the organization. So for example, a larger organization that used to be very entrepreneurial or succeeded and grew by being very entrepreneurial may decide or may find that they need to start being a little bit more corporate or a little bit more standardized or a little bit more structured in the way they operate, a little bit more repeatable. So that's a big cultural mindset shift in terms of moving from a entrepreneurial, gunslinging, shoot from the hip type of environment to more of a structured, predictable type of environment. And that sort of shift isn't going to happen overnight, and nor should it, but we can start thinking about ways to deliberately bend the culture to migrate in that direction so that as we enable other parts of our transformation, such as process improvements or technology enablements, we're also using the culture to further fuel and enable those changes that we envision. Some other examples of potential cultural mindset shifts that may apply to your organization would be things like innovation and driving innovation within your organization. Or perhaps you want to fuel better collaboration. Or perhaps you're looking for better transparency and better data-driven decision-making. Those are all cultural nuances that need to be deliberate and planned for as part of your cultural change strategy. Now, the second part of any sort of cultural transformation, even though it's oftentimes not thought of in this context, is the business process changes or business process improvements. So as you're thinking about what types of business process improvements do we want to make as part of our transformation, we also need to be thinking about how does that affect our culture? Or on the inverse, how should our culture drive potential business process improvements? So whatever direction or whatever angle you look at that from, you want to be thinking about your business processes in that context of the cultural lens. So for example, some organizations will find that earlier in their life cycle, a certain amount of flexibility is important, but as they grow, more standardization is more important. Or in some cases, a company becomes so big and so standardized that they find that they need more flexibility. So when they design their business processes, they're aiming for one of those two situations where either they are looking for more flexibility, more standardization, or maybe some sort of hybrid or middle ground. And as we're doing that and making those business process decisions, we need to be thinking about how that affects the culture and how we can bend the culture to support whatever process improvements we're driving towards. And as I mentioned in the last segment of this video, you also have things like innovation and collaboration and customer focus, things that improved business processes can further enable. And again, the culture needs to enable those sorts of process changes along the way. Another aspect of cultural change are the general organizational competencies of an organization. So as a company grows and evolves, enters new markets, takes on new customers, brings on new employees, that all translates into a need for different organizational capabilities and skills. So when we think about the culture, then we have to think about what kind of skills and competencies are we trying to build and how can we build the culture around that. So for example, we often find that organizations that are trying to use technology to enable better decision-making or better business processes will find that they need new skill sets within their IT organization. So building out the right technical competencies from a technology perspective can be very important. You also have situations where that customer-driven focus or that customer journey focus of an organization may require new customer service skill sets and processes and technologies to support that. And that all requires organizational design and hiring and recruiting processes that all support that whole organizational skill set shift. So when we're thinking about our culture, we need to be thinking about what are those competencies and capabilities that we have internally, what is it we think we need going forward, and how can we start to migrate in that direction to support whatever transformation we're enabling from a people, process, and technology perspective. So those are just some of the areas that we need to think about as we think about how we're going to transform our culture and bend our culture to support our overall transformation. But how do we actually make those changes? How do we migrate to this new cultural direction that we're trying to go as part of our transformation? So we need to look at this from a people, process, and technology perspective. And if we start with the technology and process piece, which are arguably a lot less important than the people piece, you have the technology side of things. So what sorts of technologies are going to support the type of culture we're trying to create? Too often we pick the technology, and the technology has an unintentional impact to our culture, and we don't really think about the culture. We just let the technology do what it does, and that will change our culture for better or for worse. The second part of that, and the same can be said for the business process side of things. Oftentimes we look at the process flows on a piece of paper and decide how we think we want things to look without thinking about it from the lens of the organizational impact and ultimately the culture that we want to create, either intentionally or unintentionally. So assuming we want to intentionally be deliberate about the type of culture we create, we need to be thinking about our business processes in that context. And certainly as we're defining our new business processes, we need to be defining those through the cultural lens as well. And then when we get to the people side of the people, process, and technology trifecta, that's where we start to get into things like organizational design and skill sets, hiring, training, development, general organizational change management, communications, interactions and collaboration between different parts of the business. All those things are things that enable our culture, and those are all things that can be enabled by culture as well. So it goes both directions, but the whole point here is that we want to view cultural change through all these different lenses and make sure that culture and cultural change permeates everything we do throughout the rest of our transformation, and that we have people on our transformation team that are thinking about these sorts of things as part of the overall journey. So as we define what we want to be when we grow up from a cultural perspective, we need to be thinking about how are we going to get there. We have this future state in mind of what we want the culture to look like and the direction we want to bend the culture, but how do we get from where we are today to that? And again, it's not as simple as just putting in new processes and new technology and hoping for the best. We need to be more deliberate about that from a change management and cultural change perspective. So we need to put together a cultural roadmap and a cultural change plan as part of our overall organizational change plan, which should then be part of our overall transformation plan. And that cultural change plan should address a lot of the things that we've talked about here today in terms of making sure that we align the people, process, and technologies in a way that supports that culture we're trying to enable. And to the extent that technologies and business processes drive new cultural and mindset shifts, we need to make sure that from a change management perspective, we're enabling that with our cultural change plan. So really making sure that you define that cultural roadmap is a critical part of the overall transformation strategy. So I hope this has given you a general sense of how to bake culture into your overall transformation, what some of the things are that you need to be thinking about, and how you can ultimately start to think about building that cultural change roadmap. For more information along these lines, I encourage you to download our Guide to Organizational Change Management, which is a critical must-read white paper for anyone about to go through a transformation. I encourage you to check that out to learn more about cultural change as well as other parts of organizational change management to help you through your journey. And as always, feel free to reach out if you have questions or if you'd like an informal sounding board. I'm happy to chat with you about your transformation and help you along the way. So I hope you found this information useful. Hope you have a great day.